You're listening to the Infinite Banking Mastery Podcast. Did you know that you could build a tax-free pool of wealth that's liquid and accessible all your life while building your retirement nest egg? Gain full control of your financial future and stop relying on the government and banks. The wealthy have already discovered this wealth-building secret. Now it's your turn to get financially secure without following the conventional wisdom that keeps you in debt to banks. Now here's your host, Valerie LaRocque.
Well, hello. Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. Thanks so much for listening. As I mentioned in last week's podcast, I thought I would continue on the topic of long-term care just because it's so important. Just protecting your older self. Very important. So let's continue the conversation on long-term care. Last week, I brought up the importance of this coverage and also how easily and suddenly not having this coverage can demolish your retirement savings plan or your retirement plan. I talked about what this insurance is, what it covers, and how benefits are triggered. At least I covered on that kind of with a broad overview. Oftentimes, a person's need for long-term care actually develops gradually. You may not realize that you're headed in that direction just with whatever kind of health conditions you might be dealing with. Or if a person comes down with dementia or starts dealing with dementia symptoms and they don't realize that they're becoming more and more forgetful or that it's actually dementia that they're dealing with. Maybe they just feel like, hey, I'm older and I'm getting forgetful. So all of a sudden you could realize, go to the doctor and say, oh, okay, I have dementia or I have this condition, and suddenly be uninsurable for this coverage. Just like for long-term disability or for life insurance, long-term care, you do have to qualify for it with your health. And so you can become uninsurable for it, just like with those other two coverages. And in addition, all of these coverages get more expensive as you age, just because you're more likely to need the coverage. So I wanted to begin touching on the different types of long-term care vehicles that are out there, just so you can have an understanding of your options or just different types of vehicles. The first one I'll mention is what I call a pure long-term care policy. And the reason I say that is because there's no other benefits. The whole purpose is just to cover a long-term care need. And that type of coverage functions and works more like car insurance or health insurance, where you're just paying the cost of it. You're paying the premium in case you need that coverage. But there's nothing else. There's no cash building up for you. There's no death benefit building up for you with this type of coverage. You're just paying it in case that happens. And so with this type of coverage, it actually is the lower costing style. If you want to keep costs down, this is not a bad way to go. Just keep in mind that this cost is something you'll be paying for the rest of your life until you might need this coverage or not. It is an ongoing payment. Although there is at least one company that I know of, there may be more, but at least one of the companies that I work with that will sell you a policy that is this style, but you can purchase it in a 10-year period or a 1-year period. You have options to make the full purchase in a shorter time period so that you're not actually paying for the rest of your life on this policy. If you're paying in that short time period, I can assure you it is pretty expensive. A lot of people are like, wow, that is a lot of money to pay in 10 years or pay in 1 year, especially. However, it is going to be certainly less than you would pay over time, especially if you live a long, long time, like till you're 80, 85, 90. Paying all those years would definitely end up being more money paid out on the policy than you would if you were to have a shorter time period to pay that premium. But again, it is a lot of money up front when you're doing that. So just depends on your budget and what makes more sense to you and what the better plan for you. Now, I will tell you that long-term care has been a part of the ways that I help my clients for a long time. However, in 2021, we had this new tax rolling out for our state, Washington State, a new long-term care tax. Some of you may have heard of it. Most of you may not have heard of it. I can tell you that it is not an awesome tax, and most people are very upset about it. But even worse, the benefit is terrible. It's just not anywhere near enough. So to keep a high-level overview of this tax and what's going on with it, The tax here for us in Washington State is 0.58% on wages, on W-2 income earnings. And so business owners aren't automatically looped into this, but they certainly can opt in if they would like to be a part of this mess of a tax. So it's 0.58% on W-2 earnings. The problem is that it doesn't have a stated cap as one of the problems. So they certainly can raise that 0.58% to something higher if they need more money or they see that this program needs more money. And like probably most of you, expect that this would probably go up. I mean, they're going to need more money. They need more money for everything. So I could easily see them needing to raise this tax from 0.58% to something higher. And the benefit for this, for your tax that is likely to increase over your lifetime, is a whopping $36,500 for your lifetime. It's supposed to be a one-year benefit, $36,500. Of course, I just mentioned, if those of you might have listened to my last podcast, heard how I am taking care of a beneficiary and I help pay her bills and I'm her trustee. And so at one point, I actually paid over $34,000 in 1 month for her care. It was just a really extensive care she needed that month. So $36,500, I really don't see it stretching all too far. Maybe 2 to 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. I mean, regular care I paid for at $20,000 a month. We're now at about $12,000 to $15,000 a month, but it certainly is very high. So this tax rolls out in our state, and the closer we get to this cutoff date that they gave us, they basically said, you have till this date to acquire individual care, your own policy, and if you have that in place by this particular date, then you will not have to pay this tax. So you would have to get the coverage, put it in place, and then you had to go on to a government website and let them know that you have your own individual policy. And then they would send you an opt-out letter, which at the time they told us that we had to keep for the rest of our lives, to give to every future employer, because that was our one ticket to getting out of paying for this tax. And this opt-out time period only applied to those of us living in the state at that time. It didn't apply, like if you have a 17-year-old who's turning 18 after this deadline date, there was no way for a person to acquire this kind of coverage for their child to be able to not have to pay this tax for the rest of their future lives inside of Washington State. There's a lot of other features of this tax that are not awesome, but the idea was nobody ever could opt out of this tax again. It was a one-time event. You had till this particular date, and then people moving into the state going forward would just have to pay the tax. New babies born, kids turning 18, it didn't matter. You were going to have to pay this tax. So they gave a one-time opt-out date. And as we found out about it, those of us in the industry and my colleagues, we started basically screaming from the rooftops, hey, you're probably going to want to get long-term care coverage in place because the state benefit is not great, and likely you will have to be paying higher and higher taxes throughout your life for this benefit. So we're screaming from the rooftops, and slowly but surely the masses started to hear this message. And maybe about 5 months out away from the cutoff, people really started to come to us in masses trying to ask for help with this long-term care. And so we had companies leaving the state who would refuse to help and underwrite our clients in Washington State, which was also bad because I had clients who really just wanted long-term care, who were caring for their parents at that very moment and realizing just how expensive the cost was to care for their own parents. So they were trying to lock in coverage for themselves during this craze of long-term care in our state. And I couldn't offer them the full range of options because some companies were simply refusing to help anybody in our state. And meanwhile, other companies, they just could see the massive amount of applications coming in. So then they had cutoff dates for applications because you had to submit the application and then it has to go through underwriting. You have to have your medical stuff all in order and recent blood tests and all sorts of things to be able to even go through that. And so they would do this screening. And if you hadn't done those few required things, then they're just forget it. Don't even turn in an application. We're not going to wait for you to get that stuff done. So it became really crazy at the end and just trying to get these contracts pushed through by the cutoff date. So it was during this time of mass hysteria that I started working with a lot more different companies on this product, and why I have the ability now to share with you the different types of vehicles you could cover yourself with for this. I just want to say too that California is next up on the long-term care tax happening in your state. That's what I've been hearing. And I haven't found out or learned when that's cut off, if you're going to receive a cutoff date or if they're just going to initiate it and they're not even going to give you an option to opt out any further. I feel like if you had long-term care in place that they would allow you to opt out. I'm just not sure if they're going to do the same as they did in Washington, where they gave you a time period to get that coverage in place. Also, I've heard whisperings of New York, this happening in New York, and I feel like many other states will follow. So you might want to start paying attention in your state and see if this is something that could be happening anytime soon. But just really the state wanted to pass more of this cost because it's astronomical, the cost of caring for people in their elderly years. And the state has been using Medicaid to help with that. So they're just trying to get the people to help more in this cost to cover their cost of care in their older years. In fact, in 2020, Medicaid spent roughly $200 billion on long-term care services, which is just another reminder of how much our government spends on all the different things that we need as a country and long-term care. This is just one little thing, one thing we spend our money on as a country, $200 billion in 2020. And so, as I've stated in other earlier podcasts, with all of our government spending, the government is simply going to need more money. And unless they basically, cut all programs and do a significant cut in Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, which I don't see them doing because people will riot probably in the streets. They need their Social Security and they've been paying into this program for a long time, and many people depend heavily on it. So I don't see them cutting one of those major programs, but that's basically what has to happen for them to help curb their spending and the need for income. And so the only other way they're going to be able to acquire the income needed to fund all these things that they are promising us and have already put in place is to increase our taxes, which is why I want to house as many of my own savings dollars within the vehicle of whole life insurance, where I will be able to access those dollars and the growth of those dollars income tax free at any point in time in my life. We just simply don't know what the taxes are going to do in the future. And so having the majority of your funds in taxable accounts, tax deferred accounts, tax accounts that are earmarked for retirement, and so will be taxed later on in your life, you just don't know what that tax rate's going to be. So you could end up giving up a bigger portion of your retirement funds at that time when you're no longer working and really are depending on that money. And so that's why I like to really save as much as I can into my whole life policies. And then I have that pool of cash there that I know the value of, and I know what I'll be able to access in those years when I'm needing that passive income or that retirement income. Another thing I wanted to make sure you're aware of is just that in order to be able to get help for long-term care from Medicaid, you would have to basically deplete all of your assets. And so they're not going to help cover that for you unless you have spent through all or most of your assets. And a lot of people think that Medicare is something that would cover long-term care needs, and Medicare does not cover long-term care. That would be Medicaid, where you have to deplete your assets. But Medicare will help a little bit. So if you needed like a hip replacement or something and you end up needing some rehab, they will help fund that care for a period of time, a short period of time. Then they expect you to be able to get back on your feet and not need continued services. If you need services for a while, Medicare does not cover that. It does not cover extensive long-term care needs. So I started this podcast off talking about one of the few different types of long-term care that you could acquire for yourself, the type that is like car or health insurance. But I think I'm going to continue this topic one more time, just so that I can review more of these different types of coverages and give you more of an overview and an understanding. There's just so much to teach about this. Well, I do hope that this was informative or helpful to you in some way, maybe for yourself, for future planning, for future financial planning overall, or maybe when you're thinking about your parents or other close loved ones, aunts and uncles, maybe this is a topic that you should even broach with your parents and ask what their plan is. Maybe able to help them acquire coverage now, sooner, when it's affordable, when they're insurable. It might be something you want to talk to them about. Of course, you might also find out that their plan is to move into your house. That is a possibility. And hopefully, if that is the plan, that it works out great for you and your family. Although I do bet having some funding to be able to have a nurse or a caregiver come over and help out from time to time would still be very valuable and helpful. Anyway, I do hope, again, that this was helpful information in your journey of learning and that you see how considering this potential risk is just another way to enhance your financial future along with implementing the infinite banking concept if that's possible and if that's something you want to do. If you would like to have a conversation to discuss your financial picture and where you would hope to see yourself 3 years from now and how I can help you achieve that goal and future goals, please reach out to me at valerie@alphaomegawealth.com. I've had a lot of fun connecting with and working with a lot of you. Well, thanks again for listening as always. I look forward to sharing with you again next week. Have a great week. Take care.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.